The millionaire just wanted to know why his maid missed work, but what he found broke his heart. Morning in Chicago broke in shades of cold steel, sunlight slipping through towers of glass that reflected a pale sky. On the 40th floor of a skyscraper, Ethan Cole woke like a man made of clockwork. 6 a.m., sharp. The alarm gave a soft chime, and he opened his eyes with mechanical precision. Every morning followed the same rhythm, steady footsteps on the cool wooden floor, the smell of coffee already brewing, the soft hum of the espresso machine programmed to start at the exact minute. A folded newspaper, a glowing laptop screen filled with meetings and numbers, everything perfectly placed, every second accounted for. For 4 years, Grace Miller, his housekeeper, had been part of that flawless machinery, an invisible rhythm that made his days seamless. She arrived at 7 sharp, never late, never loud, her quiet presence the only warmth in a home designed for efficiency, not emotion. But that morning, Grace didn't come. No sound of keys turning, no footsteps, no gentle greeting. "Good morning, Mr. Cole." Just silence, an echoing, sterile silence that made the apartment feel unfamiliar. Ethan glanced at the clock. 7:15, then 7:30. Still nothing. A faint crack spread through the smooth glass of his routine. Maybe the train was late, he thought. Maybe she'd forgotten to text. But when he checked his phone, no messages. He called once, twice, 3 times. Only the robotic voice of her voicemail replied, colder than the air in the room. He set the phone down, fingers tightening. Control. That was what kept his world intact. Ethan lived by structure, discipline, data. His company, Cole Technologies, thrived on precision, and so did he. Anything outside the plan made his pulse quicken in irritation. He stepped onto the balcony. The city stretched below, cars moving in sync, pedestrians rushing, sunlight catching on glass. Everything flowed like code, perfectly functional. And yet, something inside him had stalled. Why did the absence of one ordinary woman disturb him so much? He called his assistant. "I need Grace Miller's address," he said, his tone clipped. A pause on the line. "Is everything all right, sir?" "She didn't show up for work. I want to know why." 10 minutes later, he had it, an address on the south side of Chicago, a part of the city he'd never been to. Ethan slipped on his coat, grabbed his keys. He could have sent someone else, but instead, he drove himself. Maybe to end the unease rising in his chest, or maybe to face something he didn't yet understand. His black sedan glided through the streets, leaving the polished skyline behind. As the road changed, so did the world outside. Sleek towers giving way to aging brick buildings, rusted fences, small corner stores with flickering neon signs. The deeper he went, the more foreign it all felt. And strangely, more alive. He slowed as he turned into a narrow street lined with bare trees. Children rode bikes on cracked sidewalks. A coffee shop exhaled the scent of real hand-brewed coffee, the kind no machine could mimic. This place, though rough, breathed in a way his world never did. Finally, the GPS led him to a small yellow house with a crooked iron gate. Ethan parked, sat still for a moment, heart beating faster than usual. He didn't know why he'd come. Responsibility, perhaps. Or something nameless that had begun to stir quietly inside him. He stepped out, wind biting at his face, adjusted his coat, and approached the door. He knocked once. Silence. Then again, louder. Still nothing. Just as he turned to leave, a thin sound reached him. A baby crying. He froze. The door creaked open. Grace stood in the doorway, her hair a tangle around a pale face, a newborn crying softly in her arms. The house behind her was small and tired, paint peeling from the walls, light seeping through thin curtains. Ethan froze, language abandoning him. He wasn't used to scenes like this. There was no protocol, no plan for such moments. "Mr. Cole, why are you here?" Her voice cracked as she spoke. "I called. You didn't answer," he said, slower than usual, voice lower, uncertain. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." Grace looked down, avoiding his gaze. "I meant to call back, but—" The rest of her sentence drowned under the baby's cries. She swayed gently, instinctively, as if she'd done it her whole life. Ethan glanced around the room. It was barely a living space, a sagging chair, a worn table, a few toys scattered on the floor. Nothing here belonged to his world of glass and order. He hesitated. "Should I come back later?" Grace shook her head quickly. "No, please, come in. I'm sorry for the mess." Ethan stepped inside. The wooden floor creaked. The air smelled faintly of milk and coffee. In the corner, a little girl, no older than 7, stood half-hidden behind a curtain, clutching a ragged doll, her big brown eyes filled with fear. "Emma, sweetheart," Grace called softly. "Say hello." The girl didn't move. Ethan smiled, awkwardly, uncertainly. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to a child. "Hi, Emma," he said. The girl nodded, then disappeared again behind the curtain. Grace laid the baby in a crib and turned to him. "I know I should have come in today. I've never missed work before, but last night something happened." "What happened?" She swallowed hard. "My sister, Laura, she left. Just left the kids here." Ethan said nothing, only the sound of the baby's soft breathing and the faint hiss of a coffee pot filled the silence. Grace's voice trembled. "She came knocking at 3 a.m, handed me the baby, said she'd be back soon, and vanished. Her phone's off, no one knows where she is. Emma's been with me almost a year already. Laura, she's not stable." Something tightened in Ethan's chest. Grace looked utterly drained, dark circles under her eyes, hands trembling slightly. She seemed like a different person than the quiet, efficient woman who worked for him. Or maybe for the first time he was truly seeing her. "Did you call the police? Or anyone?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I'm afraid they'd take the kids away. I have no legal rights. I'm just their aunt." Ethan couldn't find words. The logical side of him, the part that always had solutions, was useless here. All he could do was stand there, watching a woman trying to hold an entire world together with nothing but love and exhaustion. She poured him a glass of water, her hand shaking enough to spill it on the table. "Sorry, the place is a bit messy." "It's fine," he said quietly. His tone surprised even himself. Gentle, human. He looked around again. The cracks on the wall, a towel hanging by the window, a pair of tiny shoes lined neatly by the mat. Each small thing pulsed with life, raw and real. Emma peeked out again, curiosity replacing fear. Ethan crouched slightly. "Is that your baby brother?" "No," she whispered. "My cousin. Mommy asked Aunt Grace to take care of him." "She's lucky to have her," Ethan said, and the girl gave a shy, fleeting smile before hiding again. He turned back to Grace. "What will you do now?" Grace exhaled, the sound almost breaking. "I don't know. I'm just trying not to fall apart." A train rumbled past somewhere nearby, rattling the window. Ethan stood, scanning the room once more. "Do you need anything?" Grace looked at him, eyes weary but proud. "I don't need pity, Mr. Cole." "It's not pity," he said softly. "It's concern." For a second, something flickered in her eyes, a fragile recognition. In her fatigue, he saw strength. In her silence, a quiet courage. And in that humble room, Ethan saw something his world had long forgotten. The pulse of humanity. As he drove back through the city, the skyline reappeared, tall, glittering, flawless. But his mind was somewhere else. He couldn't stop picturing the woman holding a baby in a yellow house and the little girl clutching a doll behind the curtain. That day, Ethan Cole understood something he never had before. His world was perfect, but empty. And in that small, imperfect house, he'd seen the first crack in his perfection, one that might just let the light in. That evening, as Ethan drove away from the narrow streets, the image of the small yellow house stayed with him. No matter how many times he tried to shake it off, it lingered, the tired face of Grace, the trembling hands holding a baby, the frightened eyes of little Emma. When he returned to his apartment, the golden light shimmered across polished surfaces, everything as perfect as ever. Yet, for the first time, the perfection felt hollow, an echo instead of comfort. He sat on the black leather chair, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. Outside the wide windows, Chicago glowed like a web of fire, but inside him, everything was dim. His mind replayed the scenes, the crying baby, the child behind the curtain, and Grace, quiet, fragile, holding her world together with nothing but love. He realized he couldn't just sit there doing nothing. The next morning, for the first time in years, Ethan left his office in the middle of the day. On the passenger seat lay several shopping bags, formula, diapers, medicine, food, and a few toys. He'd asked his assistant to help choose because he had no idea what babies needed. He wasn't used to this, yet his grip on the steering wheel was firm, driven by something he couldn't quite name. When he stopped in front of the yellow house again, sunlight glinted off the faded paint, the same crooked gate, the same stillness. He rang the bell. A moment later, Grace opened the door, startled to see him. "Mr. Cole?" "Good morning, Grace," he said, calmer than usual. "I brought a few things for you." She looked down at the bags in his hands, her brows knitting together. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, I wanted to." "You brought formula and diapers?" Her voice wavered between confusion and embarrassment. "And a few toys for the little one," he said, glancing past her to where Emma sat, curled up on the couch, clutching her old doll. Grace's hands tightened. "I can't accept this. I don't want charity." Ethan met her eyes. "This isn't charity, Grace. It's compassion." She froze, the argument dying on her lips. There was something in his voice, steady, sincere, that made her words falter. The room fell quiet except for the soft coo of the baby in the crib. After a long pause, she whispered, "Thank you." Ethan stepped inside and set the bags down. Emma peeked over curiously, her small face lighting up when she saw a new doll inside one of the bags. Ethan knelt and handed it to her. "This little one's looking for a new home," he said with a gentle smile. Emma hesitated. "For me?" "Yes, for you." The girl hugged the doll tightly, her smile blooming like sunlight. It was the first time Ethan had seen her smile, pure, unguarded, real. Behind her, Grace lifted a trembling hand to her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Ethan turned, startled. "Did I do something wrong?" She shook her head quickly. "No, I can't remember the last time she smiled like that." For a moment neither spoke. Sunlight streamed through the thin curtain, painting the room in warm gold. Ethan noticed the baby sleeping peacefully under a new blanket, his tiny hand curling in a dream. And in that small, imperfect home, something in Ethan shifted. The contracts, numbers, deadlines, none of them mattered compared to this quiet, fragile moment of life. "Sometimes," he murmured, almost to himself, "one right action is enough to change everything." Grace looked up. "What did you say?" "Nothing," he said with a faint smile. "Think of it as me returning the favor. You've taken care of me for 4 years, never once late." She opened her mouth to reply, but only nodded. "Thank you." He stepped outside, pausing under the porch. Behind him, Emma's laughter rang out, soft and bright, mingling with the birdsong. The sound filled him with something he hadn't felt in years. Warmth, quiet joy, life. As he drove away, he looked back once more. The yellow house stood still, small but steady against the city's noise. And in his heart, an unfamiliar thought began to form. Maybe life wasn't meant to be programmed. Maybe it was meant to be felt. That night, back in his apartment, Ethan felt the silence pressing harder than usual, not because it was new, but because he finally noticed it. The city lights bled through the tall windows, spilling cold reflections onto the floor. He sat down, loosened his tie, and leaned back, listening to the soft ticking of the clock, a sound that had always meant order, but now felt unbearably heavy. On the table, his phone glowed faintly. He picked it up, staring at a single word on the screen. Mom. It had been months since he last called, not out of busyness, but out of distance. Yet tonight, something in him reached out. He pressed call. Ethan? A warm, trembling voice answered. Oh my God, you're calling me? He smiled faintly, his voice low. Yeah, Mom, I know it's late. Late? Honey, I'd wait all night for you to call. The sound of her voice pulled him backward through time, to a small apartment filled with the scent of detergent and coffee, where his mother, Susan, had raised him alone after his father left. He remembered her mending his clothes under a flickering lamp, her hands raw from factory work, her tired smile that somehow never broke. Back then, he thought she was just an ordinary woman. Now he knew she had been extraordinary. Mom, he said softly, do you remember when I asked how you managed everything alone? Susan chuckled. Of course. And do you remember what I told you? He closed his eyes. You said, life doesn't wait for us to be ready. It just happens, and we do what we must. That's right, she said gently. I was never ready for any of it, Ethan. But every morning, I woke up because I had you. Sometimes that's all we need, a reason to keep going. Ethan swallowed hard. A wave of memories swept through him. The rain tapping the window, the hum of her sewing machine, the smell of coffee late at night. He had spent years trying to escape that life, thinking success meant freedom. But now he saw the truth. That love, not ambition, was what had held everything together. Mom, he whispered, I think I forgot what matters. I spent years chasing things that never filled me. And today, I met someone who reminded me of you. She's not my mother, but she's caring for 2 kids who aren't hers, just because she couldn't let them be alone. Susan was quiet for a moment, then said, And now you see it, don't you? The part of you that still remembers how to care. He nodded, though she couldn't see it. Yes, for the first time, I think I understand you. Why you never complained, why you kept smiling, even when life wasn't fair. Her voice softened, full of pride. Then that's enough, Ethan. Thank you for remembering. You sound like someone who's found his heart again. When the call ended, the apartment didn't feel so cold anymore. The city outside still glittered, but inside him, a gentler light flickered to life, warm, human, alive. That night, Ethan understood. Emptiness didn't come from a lack of success, but from a lack of love. And in remembering his mother's quiet strength, he found the first spark of compassion that would guide him forward. After that late-night call with his mother, something in Ethan quietly shifted. The next morning, as he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he saw something different in his reflection. Not the distant gaze of a businessman, but the calm of someone slowly waking up. He began doing things that once felt pointless, stopping by a small grocery store, buying milk, vegetables, fruit, picking out toys he thought Emma might like. And every afternoon, as sunlight stretched across the streets, he drove south to the little yellow house. At first, Grace kept her distance, gratitude mixed with caution in her eyes. Ethan didn't push. He simply helped, chopping vegetables, tidying shelves, fixing a squeaky cabinet. Sometimes he'd sit on the floor and listen to Emma chatter about her drawings, her voice bright and full of life. Each time he arrived, she would shout, "Uncle Ethan's here!" And the whole house seemed to light up. Slowly, his presence became part of their days. No one planned it. It just happened, natural as breathing. and Ethan began to feel peace in a place that once made him uneasy. One evening, as the sun dipped low, baby James began to cry. Hard, relentless, desperate. Grace tried everything, feeding, rocking, changing him, but the wailing only grew louder. She looked exhausted, panic flickering in her eyes. Ethan stood nearby, helpless for a moment, then took a step forward. "Let me try," he said. Grace hesitated, then handed him the baby. Ethan's arms were stiff at first, unsure, clumsy. The child squirmed, crying against his chest. He took a slow breath, searching his memory for something buried deep. And then, quietly, he began to hum, too. It was the lullaby his mother used to sing to him, her voice echoing from some faraway night. His low, rough tone filled the small room. Gradually, James's cries softened, his tiny body relaxing, eyes fluttering shut. The silence that followed was tender, almost sacred. Grace stood still, watching him. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of awe and warmth. For the first time, she saw not the businessman, but the man beneath, human, gentle, uncertain, yet kind. Ethan looked down at the sleeping child, a faint smile on his lips. "Maybe I'm not as hopeless as I thought," he whispered. Grace brushed away a tear. You really made him sleep?" "It's not magic," he murmured. "Just an old song I remembered." In that quiet moment, the distance between them vanished. Two worlds, so far apart, found a fragile bridge made of empathy and trust. They stood there side by side, bathed in the warm light of dusk, bound by something neither had expected to feel. That night, Ethan realized he'd formed a new habit, not one written in schedules or spreadsheets, but one that drew him back again and again to the only place where he felt truly alive. And in that habit, his heart had finally begun to open. In the days that followed, the little yellow house filled with laughter. Emma had grown used to Ethan's visits, racing to the gate whenever she heard his car. Baby James now smiled whenever Ethan reached for him. And Grace, she smiled more too, not the cautious kind she used to wear, but a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Ethan didn't say it aloud, but he knew. This house had quietly become a part of him. That afternoon, the sky darkened early. Heavy clouds pressed low, and the air carried the scent of rain. Ethan had just set a basket of fruit on the table when loud, urgent knocks echoed through the door. Grace froze mid-step, her face draining of color. She walked slowly to the door, opened it, and there stood Laura. She looked frail, her hair tangled, eyes sunken, dark circles smudged beneath them. Her coat was worn, her hands trembling against the doorframe. But it wasn't just exhaustion in her eyes. It was despair. "You're back," Grace whispered. "Yes," Laura rasped, her breath reeking of alcohol. "I'm here to take my kids." Ethan, standing in the living room, caught every word. He moved closer, steady, but alert. "Laura," Grace began softly, "you're not ready yet. Please, let them stay a little longer until you're stronger." "No, they're my children!" Laura's voice cracked into a shout. "You always think you're better than me, always taking over, pretending you're the saint?" Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "That's not true. I just wanted to protect them." "Protect them?" Laura spat. "By stealing them from me? By letting this rich stranger replace me?" Her glare turned to Ethan, sharp and wounded. The room fell silent, thick with tension. Ethan inhaled slowly, his voice calm but firm. "No one's trying to steal your children, Laura. Grace cared for them because you couldn't at the time." "And what do you know about me?" she snapped. "You, with your money and your perfect life, you know nothing about losing everything?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, and saw beyond the anger. He saw someone broken, scared, trapped inside her own mistakes. When he spoke again, his voice was low but steady. "I know more than you think, and I know that even when a mother is lost, she's still a mother trying to survive. Laura's defiance faltered, her eyes filled. I tried. God, I tried to quit, to stay clean, but I can't. I keep falling. Her body shook with sobs. Grace reached for her, voice trembling. You're not alone, Laura. You have me. You always have me. The two sisters sank to the floor, clinging to each other, crying as the storm began outside. Ethan stood there, watching silently, feeling something shift deep within him. Love wasn't perfect, he realized, but it was the only thing that could rebuild what life had broken. When the crying quieted, Ethan spoke gently. Laura, I can help. There's a treatment center out of state. A good one. I'll cover everything. You just need to say yes. Laura looked up, tears streaking her face. Why? Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me? He smiled faintly. Because everyone deserves a second chance, and because forgiveness, whether for others or for yourself, is where healing begins. The room stilled. Outside, rain began to fall, soft and steady. Laura lowered her head, then nodded. All right, I'll go. I'll try one last time. Grace hugged her tightly. You'll make it. I know you will. As the taxi carried Laura away through the rain, she looked back through the window. Grace stood under the porch beside Ethan, two people she once blamed for her pain, now the only ones who still believed in her. And through the blurred glow of streetlights, she whispered to herself with a fragile smile, "This time, I'll come back, for real." The rain had stopped long ago, but Grace's heart was still uneasy. Since Laura left for rehab, peace had slowly returned to the little house. Emma's laughter, baby James's giggles, and Ethan's visits filled their evenings with quiet joy. Life felt steady again. Until that morning, when Grace opened the mailbox and found a letter from the Illinois Department of Children and Family Services, DCFS. The paper was crisp, but the words inside made her hands tremble. We have received an anonymous report regarding 2 minors living in a household without legal guardianship. Her breath caught. Ethan had just stepped inside when he saw her pale. What happened? He asked. She handed him the letter. His jaw tightened. Someone reported you, she whispered. They're sending an officer to investigate. Ethan placed a steady hand on her shoulder. No one's taking those kids away, I promise. He immediately called Rebecca, his longtime attorney. Within hours, they were gathered in the small living room, papers spread across the table, birth certificates, vaccination records, utility bills, photos. We'll need to show that Grace provides a stable, safe environment, Rebecca said, and that Ethan isn't just supporting financially, but is part of their lives. She's their mother, Ethan replied quietly. Maybe not by blood, but by love? For 2 days, they worked non-stop. Ethan repaired shelves, painted the front door, planted flowers by the porch. Grace organized the children's rooms. Rebecca compiled every document, even photos of family meals and Emma's drawings. By the end, the home radiated warmth, a lived-in, loved-in place. On Tuesday afternoon, Natalie, the social worker, arrived. She was a composed woman with keen eyes and a calm voice. Ethan greeted her politely while Grace tried to steady her shaking hands. Ms. Grace Miller, Natalie began, flipping open her notebook. We're here to verify the welfare of the 2 minors residing here. Yes, of course, Grace replied, forcing a smile. Please, check anything you need. Natalie skimmed the paperwork, took notes, and asked to meet the children. Emma came running out, holding a crayon drawing of a small house with 4 stick figures, herself, James, Grace, and Ethan. Natalie smiled. That's lovely, Emma. Who are they? This is Aunt Grace, this is James, and this is Uncle Ethan. And what's written here? Emma beamed. It says, our home. Natalie looked at the picture for a long time before walking slowly through the house. The rooms were tidy but lived in, the air filled with the faint scent of coffee and baby powder. She noticed the framed photos on the wall, Grace holding James, Ethan reading to Emma, and something in her expression softened. After a moment, she closed her notebook. "I've seen many kinds of families," she said quietly. "Some wealthy but hollow, others humble but full of love. Here, I see children who are safe, cared for, and deeply loved." She smiled, her voice gentle. Families come in many shapes. Sometimes the most beautiful ones are the ones we build ourselves. Grace covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Ethan reached for her hand, his thumb brushing hers. "If you agree," Natalie continued, "I'll recommend that Grace be granted temporary guardianship while the biological mother recovers. We'll conduct regular check-ins, but I believe these children are right where they belong." When the door finally closed behind her, Grace turned to Ethan, eyes wide and wet. "We can stay, can't we?" He smiled softly. "Not just stay. We've been recognized as a family." Outside, the late sun poured gold across the porch. Emma ran to wrap her arms around them, and baby James laughed in Grace's arms. Ethan looked at them, these three souls who had rewritten his world, and knew without a doubt that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, and by those we choose to never let go. That night, after the children had fallen asleep, the house glowed softly under a warm yellow light. The breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers through the porch, and somewhere beyond, crickets sang their quiet song. Ethan and Grace sat side by side on the steps, wrapped in a silence that felt more like understanding than emptiness. "Thank you," Grace murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "For everything." Ethan smiled. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone should." She shook her head gently. "No, Ethan, you stayed when everyone else walked away." The words lingered between them. Their eyes met, hesitant, searching, but full of something unspoken. What had grown between them wasn't sudden or fiery. It had been quietly building through shared moments, small gestures, and the comfort of simply being there. "Grace," Ethan said softly, his voice low and honest, "I never thought I'd feel this again. But when I'm here, with you, with Emma and James, I feel like I belong somewhere real." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. "Aren't you afraid of all this mess, all this imperfection?" He chuckled quietly. "No. I used to live in a world where everything was perfect and it was empty. This chaos, this feels alive. I choose this." Before she could respond, Ethan reached out, gently cupping her face. The question in his eyes didn't need words, and Grace didn't pull away. Their lips met softly, slow, tender, filled with meaning. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of recognition, of two hearts finding home in each other. When they pulled apart, Grace rested her head on his shoulder. "Ethan? Yeah? I never thought I'd be happy again." He smiled, pressing his lips to her forehead. "From now on, you're not alone." It wasn't a promise made of grand gestures, but one rooted in truth. From that night on, their worlds quietly intertwined. Weeks later, Ethan surprised her with an idea. "Move in with me," he said, then quickly added, laughing at her startled look, "Not the apartment. Let's find a place for us. For all of us." Grace stared at him for a long moment. There was fear in her eyes, but also hope. "If it's with you," she finally said, "then yes." They spent days searching until they found it, a small white house with a red roof and a garden filled with lavender. Emma ran from room to room, squealing with joy, while James giggled in Ethan's arms. What followed was a beautiful mess: rushed breakfasts, toys scattered across the floor, burnt toast, endless laughter. Ethan learned to make bottles, to change diapers, to sing lullabies badly, but with heart. And every chaotic, noisy day felt more perfect than any silence he'd known. One golden afternoon, Ethan led Grace out to the porch. Emma and James played nearby, laughter ringing through the garden. He turned to her, holding a small box in his hands. "I've never had a perfect life," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "But since meeting you, I've learned happiness doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be real. I want to walk through every bit of this chaos and calm with you. Grace, will you marry me?" Grace covered her mouth, tears shining. Emma clapped her hands and shouted, "Say yes, Aunt Grace." Grace laughed through her tears and nodded. "Yes, I will." Ethan slipped the simple ring onto her finger and kissed her, while Emma cheered and James's laughter filled the air. As the sunset painted the sky and the scent of lavender drifted around them, Ethan knew that happiness didn't mean order or stillness. It was this, the sweet chaos, the laughter, the noise, the warmth of hands that held on. And in that golden light he realized love had finally found its way home. Spring came softly that year, wrapping the little white house in sunlight and the scent of new grass. From the living room came laughter, Emma cutting paper for birthday cards, James toddling with colored blocks, Grace standing by the window, one hand resting on her stomach, eyes filled with a secret glow. Ethan walked in from the yard, paint still on his sleeves. He paused for a moment, taking in the scene. The quiet, imperfect peace he once thought he'd never deserve. That afternoon, a taxi stopped outside the gate. Grace froze when she saw the woman step out. Laura? She looked different, healthier, steadier, her eyes clearer than before. She took a deep breath, as though crossing back into a world she feared had forgotten her. "You look good," Grace said, pulling her into a hug. Laura's voice trembled. "It's the first time in years I felt clean. I wanted to see them." Emma appeared at the doorway, hesitated for a second, then gasped. "Mom!" She ran into Laura's arms, laughter and tears mingling as Grace stood by, hand over her heart. James, curious, reached out his tiny hands. Laura knelt, scooping him up. "Mommy's here, sweetheart." That evening, everyone gathered around the dinner table. The soft golden light fell on familiar faces, Grace beside Laura, Emma giggling between bites, James babbling happily, Ethan across the table, and Susan, his mother, smiling warmly as she poured tea. She had driven over from her neighborhood in Chicago and instantly won the children over with her stories and gentle laughter. Susan leaned closer to Ethan, her eyes tender. "You look happier than I've ever seen you, son." Ethan glanced around, Grace wiping James's mouth, Laura fixing Emma's bow, Emma talking about school with wide, excited eyes. The clinking of spoons, the smell of apple pie, the quiet hum of family life, things he once never thought he'd have. Dinner ended with a small birthday cake for Emma. She closed her eyes, hands clasped, candles flickering. "I wish," she whispered, smiling, "that our family will always stay together." The room fell silent for a heartbeat. Grace reached for Ethan's hand and gently placed it on her stomach. His breath caught, eyes widening in disbelief and wonder. "Are you?" Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yes, we're having a baby." For a moment, no one moved. Then Emma squealed, "I'm going to be a big sister." Susan stood, hugging Ethan tight, while Laura wiped her tears with a smile. Ethan looked around the table at the faces glowing in candlelight, at the laughter and warmth that filled every corner of the house. His voice broke softly as he said, "I thought I was building an empire, but it turns out I was building a home." Grace squeezed his hand. "And that's the greatest thing you'll ever build." Ethan smiled, feeling the truth settle deep in his chest. Around him were people who had once been strangers, but were now his whole world, people bound not by blood, but by love, forgiveness, and choice. Outside, the night sky shimmered with stars. Inside, laughter rose again, gentle and bright. And Ethan understood at last. True happiness lives not in what we achieve, but in the hearts that stay, with love and without condition.